Ronaldo. Oh, that's a great ball. Oh, it had to be. Haaland.
Overlap! Nketiah! He's got the big chance. He's got the big chance. And it's Salah for Liverpool.
Andy, for the final time this season, let's go up and down the Premier League table. Let's preview match week 38, Championship Sunday, give our predictions and thoughts on all the games. Starting at the top of the table, we know obviously Man City have won the Premier League, three-peat, won 5 of the last 6 titles. They're away at Brentford, who still have a chance of qualifying for the Europa Conference League if they beat Man City and then get a lot of help elsewhere themselves. So what do you think about that game? Because again, City have been rotating and resting players ahead of the FA Cup final and Champions League final. So a bit of an opportunity here for Brentford to maybe finish their incredible season with another big win.
They are going to relish this opportunity to play Manchester City at the right time, in the right situation. We take the game to them. We bring the end. It's what Brentford does. It's what they do to everybody. A lot like Brighton did on, what was it, Wednesday when they played Manchester City, or Thursday. I'm getting the days mixed up now at this point. But they really, really made Manchester City uncomfortable by playing the exact same way against them that they play against everybody else in the Premier League. They didn't say, oh, it's Man City, we have to get defensive and we have to be conservative. It was just as aggressive. It was just as front foot as it always is. Brentford will do that as well. I think they'll get a point out of this one. It won't be the best Manchester City performance. They're on short rest. They're obviously, I don't know if there will be resting, but it will probably be a little bit of rotation because of the game on Wednesday and then the 2 cup finals coming up. So I think Brentford gets something from this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a draw. I was going to go for maybe a Brentford win, but maybe that's a little bit too much. I mean, City, even when they rotate their team, they're still incredible players coming into the lineup. Arsenal are at home against Wolves on the final day. Arsenal win, comfortable. I think Wolves is a little bit of uncertainty with Julian Lopetegui's position. He's talking about having more talks behind the scenes to figure out what the plan is for next season and what the resources are at Wolves. That's a bit worrying for them, given the incredible job he did to drag them out of the relegation zone and then finish very comfortably in mid-table. So I can see Arsenal finishing off with a flourish, and second place, like we said earlier in the show, is really good to jump from 5th to 2nd and qualify for the Champions League, have the youngest team in the Premier League for next season. Feels like Jesus, Saka, Odegaard, those guys are going to have a bit of a field day against Wolves on the final day. What do you think?
Yeah, there's nothing to really play for left for Arsenal, so they can play well. They can play comfortably. They can play freely the way that they did for a lot of the season until there was really, truly something on the line to play for.
All right, fair enough. Top 4 in Europe, obviously that's all sorted out now. We know Newcastle are in the Champions League for the first time in over 20 years, which is going to be fun to see next season, and totally deserved on their performances this campaign. So congrats to our friend Nick Mendola, Buffalo's biggest Newcastle United fan. Chelsea against Newcastle this weekend at the Bridge. Weird game because it's, Chelsea would obviously think that they would be in Newcastle's situation, but they've messed it up so badly with all their new signings and managerial changes and all the rest of it. So I think maybe a draw in this one sounds about right. I think Newcastle got a few injury issues and won't want to risk players already for next season. So do you agree with that?
Yeah. Joe, there's a very real chance that Chelsea finish the season under 45 points. Unless they beat Newcastle, a Champions League team now, on Sunday, under 45 points. Think about that number. That's half of what the champions are going to have. They are halfway to being the champions of the Premier League. Chelsea, with the money that was spent, not just this season, but years and years, and what that club has done and the trophies that they have won. It's an incredible fall. Because Liverpool had a period where they fell off massively, but I don't think they ever quite fell off this badly. It's going to be interesting to see what Chelsea kind of do long term and how quickly they can get back. But yeah, this has Newcastle written all over it to me. Just such a smart, professional, operating team that just handles their business as good as anybody in the league.
Yeah, and Chelsea could fall as low as 14th, could finish 14th in the Premier League. And what would that be? That would be just a handful of points just above the relegation zone, which shows you how bad they've been this season. But congrats to Newcastle. Massive achievement from Eddie Howe's team, as we spoke about earlier this week, to get in the Champions League. Man United, another team that got into the Champions League with that win against Chelsea in midweek. Erik ten Hag's done a great job there. Some big signings. They've had a few big injuries recently, but they managed to get through it and get the top 4 spot they needed to. Won the League Cup. They're in the FA Cup final. So they finish the season, Andy, in top 4 like they have, and then win the League Cup and add the FA Cup to it, then that's a great season for Man United. They host Fulham this weekend, and probably a narrow Man United win, something like that. It's going to be a tight one. Fulham have had a good season, but they've had a couple of big injuries recently to deal with too.
Yeah, well, United dealing with a couple of injuries now as well, and potentially players that might not be available for the FA Cup final. But it's going to be an opportunity, I think, to sharpen themselves for that game and to, one last opportunity to impress Erik ten Hag. It's the biggest game of the season. It's not just the FA Cup final. The fact it's Manchester United, Manchester City with an opportunity to prevent the treble just adds a little bit more. And I think that we're going to see United keep the intensity through the end of the season the way that maybe some teams don't, shall we say?
Yeah, no, I think Erik ten Hag demands that, doesn't he? But what a great season Fulham have had under Marco Silva to be in that position. Top 10, great finish. No one expected that. So we haven't really talked about them much this week, but one of the stories of the season as well, Fulham, for finishing where they have in the league. We look at the other storylines. Liverpool just missed out on top 4. They're going to finish obviously 5th, Europa League group stage. Jurgen Klopp and Mohamed Salah have been talking about how disappointed. I think Salah used devastated to not be in the Champions League. So interesting to see these storylines and how it impacts Liverpool's transfer plans this summer. But I think we saw the last couple of months, they figured it out again and figured out who they are and a slightly tweaked version of themselves. And given the resources they have with or without the Champions League, you got to feel like they'll make a couple of big signings in midfield over the summer, and they'll be up there in the top 4 hunt, maybe even in the outside title push for next season. Given that they figured it out, I think is the best way to sum it up. And they're away at Southampton, who are relegated, their last game in the Premier League potentially for a long time, given the rebuild and the issues they're having behind the scenes. So I think Liverpool win there pretty easy, and some of the guys like Firmino and others will probably get a few goals to sign off with Liverpool in fine fashion. Talking about signing off in fine fashion for both Aston Villa and Brighton. Brighton already secured Europa League group stage. They're going to finish 6th. And Aston Villa, if they beat Brighton at home at the weekend, they are absolutely guaranteed 7th place, which is the Europa Conference League, which is an incredible turnaround from Unai Emery's side. When he arrived in November, they were in a relegation scrap, and now they are on the verge of qualifying for Europe for the first time in 13 years. So I spoke to Leon Bailey and Douglas Luiz earlier this week, and they were just absolutely waxing lyrical about Unai Emery and about how, he's made it so easy for them to understand. He gives them a structure to play in. And then Bailey told me it's great. You go out on the pitch and you have clarity and you just express yourself. And we're seeing that, right, from this entire Villa team at the back, midfield, up front, just the balance, the cohesiveness as a unit, but also the efficiency with what they're playing with under Unai Emery. We've seen it at Sevilla, Villarreal with him, and he's done exactly the same at Villa. So obviously Brighton, the club of the season, as we said earlier this week in our awards, but Aston Villa, probably the turnaround and the comeback kids of the season, right?
Yeah. I noticed you didn't mention another club that Unai Emery had managed fairly recently in there, because I was told that he wasn't good enough for the Premier League because of his
certainly is.
Struggles at Arsenal. This matchup, by the way, for the final day of the season, could not have a better matchup unless you had City, Arsenal a point apart or level on points going to the final day of the season. And by the way, Joe, a tip of the cap to you for assigning me this game this weekend. Like, 2 of my favorite teams to watch in the league. We kind of talked about how Brighton played against Manchester City. Villa, very aggressive and very confident in the way that they play, for all of the reasons that you just listed there, from Leon Bailey. This is the best just head-to-head matchup in the Premier League this weekend. And I don't see much between the 2 teams. I think Brighton's slightly better team, but Villa being at home, I think maybe, kind of balances that out. I could see it being 3-3, 4-4, maybe 5-5. Have we ever had a 5-5 game in the Premier League?
Need to get the stats people involved here. I'm not sure. I feel like West Brom Man United, maybe Ferguson's last game, was maybe 5-5, but maybe I'm making that up. But we'll double check that. Okay, Leeds against Spurs. Again, implications in Europe because Tottenham, if they win, and obviously Aston Villa slip up against Brighton at home, then Spurs finish 7th and get the Europa Conference League spot. I've said this to you before. I don't think Spurs want to do that. I think that it's much better for them to not be in Europe next season, and a new manager coming in has more time to work on the training ground with players. You've seen it time and time again. You mentioned it earlier, the likes of Chelsea previously when they had bad seasons. Worked out a lot better for them to not have European action the next season, to rebuild and really work on a new philosophy and identity with new players. So I think I can actually see Leeds winning this, or maybe a draw, given Leeds' situation. We talked about it a lot on the relegation picture this week. They need to win and get help from Everton and Leicester as well, and hope those guys slip up. So a tall order for Sam Allardyce's side, but I think maybe they get a point and Harry Kane gets a couple of goals for Tottenham. That's what I'm going with at Elland Road. Focusing on the relegation situation, and Andy, the big one, I'll be at Goodison. Really looking forward to this one. Everton against Bournemouth. Situation simple. Everton win, they stay in the Premier League. They draw, they lose, and they are relying on help from Leicester and Leeds, because Leicester have a better goal differential than Everton. So there is a situation where Everton could draw at home against Bournemouth, Leicester win against West Ham, and then Everton go down on goal difference. So I'm going to go for an Everton win, but I got a feeling that you're going to say that they're going to slip up and drop some points at home against Bournemouth and could be costly.
Yeah, story of their couple of seasons, I guess, for Everton. They should do, and they just kind of don't. I think they're going to drop points in this one. Bournemouth have been really, really just tough to play against for a few months now, basically ever since Gary O'Neill had an opportunity, I believe it was over an international break, to have a proper week of training with his players after he took over and got the job, and they've looked like a completely different team since then. So I think they get something from this one. And by the way, Joe, you are an encyclopedia of football. 5-5, Manchester United, West Brom, Sir Alex Ferguson's last game. You nailed it.
Well, that's just my thing. That's kind of what I do. So Leicester against West Ham is a huge, huge game. Obviously, Leicester, for them, it's a good team to play against. West Ham are focused fully on the Europa Conference League final that they're in, and David Moyes will be resting players for that. But for Leicester, they know they have to win and then hope that Everton slip up against Bournemouth. And we think they're going to win, right? And win quite comfortably. And then it's all about what happens at Goodison. But the Foxes, what a mess they've been in for most of this season. Their squad is too good to get relegated. We say that a lot about teams that go down, but simply in this case, this might be one of the better squads that's ever been in this situation, and probably does go down. But we think they're going to win, and then they just need help.
Yeah, the combination of the talent that is there and the severity, the realness of the situation, with West Ham having eyes pretty firmly focused elsewhere at this point. It just feels like everything is kind of lined up in this particular relegation situation for Leicester to kind of make. I mean, it will be an escape. You start the final day of the season in the relegation zone, and you finish the final day outside of it. It's an escape, and they've been down there, in and very, very close to the relegation for a large part of the season.
Yeah. So let's see if the Foxes can scrap their way out of the bottom three in the final 90 minutes of the season. And the final game to preview, Andy, nothing right on this one, but Crystal Palace against Nottingham Forest. Obviously, a lot of Palace players out of contract. We're still not sure about Roy Hodgson's future. Is he going to stick on in some kind of, director capacity, or maybe even stay on for another season at the Eagles? We'll wait and see. But they're fun to watch. And Nottingham Forest have been fun to watch down the stretch as well. They really embraced the challenge of being in the relegation scrap, and fair play for them to sticking with Steve Cooper and the fans and all the players staying on side. And, all three newly promoted teams staying in the Premier League. Doesn't happen often. So tip of the cap to Forest and to Palace for turning things around. And I could kind of see a fun score draw, 2-2, 3-3, something like that down at Selhurst on the final day. You having that?
Yeah. Palace is kind of a team that it was last year, it was Villa. Saw a lot of progression and signs and said, okay, next season, feel like that's going to be a team that makes a big leap. And they did. It feels like Palace have that potential with Eberechi Eze, Michael Olise being, taking a big leap this season. The big question is, does Wilfred Zaha stay? Maybe, I don't want to say this quietly, maybe it's better if he kind of moves on and they can build a full squad and it not kind of be the Wilfred Zaha show going forward. Going to be an interesting summer for Palace, but I feel like they have a lot of potential to be really good next season, and they're entertaining as can be. Forest don't defend very well. You put those two things together, you get a pretty good game as well.
Well, this has been a pretty good